So in the M&A market, we always use the phrase, the devil's in the details of transactions. I guess I was thinking about last night, I was calling it the nitty gritty, right? I mean, you really got to pay attention to crossing your T's and dotting your I's, especially today when the due diligence process is, what I say, very detailed and sometimes overwhelming to our sellers. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about how that falls into those nitty-gritty details and when you have a structure in your transaction. Hi, everyone. My name's kdee, President of Osage Advisors. Welcome back to our podcast, The Ins and Outs of Selling a Business. So those nitty-gritty details is important throughout a transaction, but especially today. We're seeing, given the current state of the market, there's a lot of concerns about, how companies can perform, down the road, right? Buyers buy your business based on future growth opportunities and profitability. They pay for your business essentially based on your historical earnings profile. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Show me the growth, but we're going to pay you on your past history, right? Which, it makes sense. But when you're in a marketplace like we are today, where you really can't put a pulse on the future, tends to create a gap in valuation of what we believe the company's worth and what the buyer is willing to, pay for it today. So this is like what happened right after COVID, by the way. So, it was like, we can't figure things out yet, but we want to pay you the full amount, but we can't give it to you today. So that's what they call, you add in, structure, right? I mean, like, we're willing to pay you X today, and then we will put forth a contingent payment. If you prove it to me. If you do this over the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, depending on how you structure a deal, we'll pay it out, right? If you hit that 3 million EBITDA or 4 million EBITDA, whatever it is, we're happy to pay it because we have growth in the business and you've earned it, right? And sometimes that could be what we call in a seller note, that we can't get the financing today to support the purchase price because the bank's only willing to do X because they have stringent underwriting criteria these days. So maybe we add in a seller note, right, at the back end. Now, depending on where you are in your life cycle, that may be acceptable. Now, you're going to get a feel for how companies are structuring when you run an efficient auction process like Osage does, right? We all want cash at closing, right? That's the best deal because you're done, right? You got maybe a 2-year employment agreement, maybe you roll some equity, and you're partnering with the private equity firm to grow it, but you got your cash out, right? That's the best solution. That's the best for everybody. But when you start getting multiple bids in on a transaction, like we typically get between 8 and 12 bids per deal, and they all have structure to them, right? Earnout, seller note, maybe both. Then this is the current market. So as a seller, now you become educated and informed that the reason why I'm not getting all cash today is because there's uncertainty in the marketplace. We can't get visibility on the future given where we are today. But buyer still wants to pay it. Just, prove it to me, right? Show me you can do it, and I'm happy to pay it. Which is a dilemma to a lot of sellers because, they're like, oh, they're trying to screw me, right? They're like, they don't really want to pay me. They're going to find a way not to pay me, which is a natural reaction to a future payment, especially when you're not in control anymore, right? We always recommend to our clients, if there's an earnout, and even a seller do something, you stay on at least a couple of years, whether it's under employment agreement, equity role, or a very lucrative consulting agreement. So you have some say in how the business performs because you have all that knowledge in your mind. No matter what due diligence they do, no matter how much they do, it's all going to go back to the people on your team, including yourself, have the knowledge and ability and relationships to build this business to the next level. So you're going to want to stay involved. And there's a lot of different ways to be involved in the company. As an equity holder and an employee, under a management contract or a consulting contract, as well as your key people, right? You don't want to lose them. And another thing is when you're looking at these contingent payments, you got to know the buyer, right? You got to know what their track record is. So you just don't take it at face value. We recommend that when we get down to that last couple buyers, right? So, after we get these bids in and we invite people in, we have management presentations, you get to know them, and you get to feel when you, as a seller, you have an intuitive gut. I call it your gut, right? You feel in your gut that I'm not so sure about this group, and your intuition is probably correct, so they're out. And we have a lot of deals we work on all the time where, we invite like these, 4 or 5, maybe 6 parties, and maybe 7 parties in. And someone has a great offer on it, a great bid, right? Like, this is what we want to this. And they come in and our client just gut tells them, no, thank you, right? Happened many times. So they're out. But then you're down to 3 or 4 people. You get the LOIs in. And before you, and there's structure. In these cases, to say there's an earnout, seller note combination, roll of equity. Oh, no. So before you sign off on the LOI, it's really important to diligence them, right? If I'm putting this money on the table for a future payment, I want to know you guys have a track record. So you ask them for references. We always do. We tell them, we're happy to make the phone calls, but we encourage our clients, you make the call because you need to talk to current owners that sold their business and are still with the company, and owners who had sold their business are no longer with the company. How did it work out for you guys? And if the buyer is unwilling to give you that, open access to communicate with an owner still with them or an owner who sold and, retired, that's a big red flag, right? Or if you're dealing with a fund or buyer that's, this is their first deal and there's a lot of structure in it, what's the backstop, right? What's my security that you guys are going to perform, right? And that's where the details come into play. Right? You really got to focus on that piece of it. If you're dealing with a PE firm that has done, 200 transactions and $2 billion invested over the last 25 years, they didn't get that track record by, quote unquote, screwing you as a seller, right? They got that track record because they did deals and they stuck to the terms and condition and of the transaction, and they abided by it, honored the transaction, right? Didn't try to retrade it, try to do something unscrupulous down the road. They honored the transaction. They didn't get to raising $2 billion and closing 150 transactions because they screwed all these business owners, right? But you still want to talk to some of their former clients to understand it. And not only, so that's kind of like the overall, and then you get to the nitty-gritty details of how that's all going to work, right? Once you get comfortable that they're capable and honorable and you're comfortable about taking a back-end payment, then you have to be in a position that you need to memorialize it in the agreement, right? And so you have to take a really, 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 really detailed look at the nitty-gritty details of how it's calculated. In this case, the earnout. What is included in that earnout, right? You don't want to leave it open to interpretation because that's the worst thing that can happen. You need to put some context and parameters around and definition around what goes into calculating that earnout payment. And if they don't give you that context, that's a big warning flag. Like the earnout will be calculated consistent with the prior earnings, except that the CEO will earn a market rate, salary. What does that mean? Right? That just happened to us. What is market rate salary and other fees associated with the transaction? In this case, I believe, I'm not sure yet because I don't know. I think we kind of figured it out and we're still waiting. It's probably they want some board seats, right? So they're going to be a representative from the private equity fund, a representative from the lender, maybe an outside board member. They don't do it for free, right? There's costs. But in our case, they're not included, right? We are very adamant when we have an earnout about spending the time up front and detailing it in the LOI, the letter of intent. So there's no there's no opportunity for the buyer to kind of say, well, we didn't agree to that. But you did agree to it. I can't tell how many times that we pointed back to LOI and said, look, we worked out the language in LOI. Here it is. Black and white. You signed it. Now, it's non-binding LOI, but if you're working in good faith, if you want to close a deal, then you abide by the terms and condition we laid out. That letter of intent is your roadmap to the purchase agreement, whether it's a stock or an asset, what doesn't matter. That LOI is important. And once you have a structured in a transaction, whether it's a seller note and or an earnout, especially with the earnout piece, because that's a big number typically that's on the back end, right? Could be a couple million, could be 5 million, could be more. You want to make sure that everybody's of like minds and agree to it. You don't want them to come back to you when they're one of the last things that you agree to, the earnout language in the contract, right? And the buyers, lawyers will put the kitchen sink into that stuff that we didn't agree to, right? It could be that the buyer's lawyer's lender is insisting on some of this language in this thing, which is another thing we've talked about in the past. If you have memorialized in your LOI what the earnout is calculated on, you point to it. And we've pointed to that language multiple times, right? And it's just not, we're focused on the earnout right now, but it's just not the earnout. If a buyer gives you a LOI that's just kind of like vague and we'll pay you an earnout based on X and they say, well, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. Once we do our due diligence. And I'm like, no, that's not how we're doing it. We're going to determine today, meaning while we do the LOI, what's included. And typically how we phrase it is the earnout will be calculated consistent with the historical operations of the business operating over the last several years. Pretty clear, right? Clear and concise. That's how we want it. We got the language back on a deal and it put his other stuff into it. But there was no parameters around, no definition around, like, okay, what is the CEO's salary? What are you talking about? Board fees and other fees? No, they're not included. And, we took a hard stand on that because hey, here it is. Okay, you're right. Okay, we'll go back. They'll try to sneak things in there that are not consistent with what we agreed to. So you got to be very careful. Again, the nitty-gritty details of how that's all worked. And when you get an LOI, first off, never sign a letter of intent without having your, obviously your banker, meaning us, look at it. And then once we make our comments on it, and sometimes our comments are significant since we have, 25 years experience doing this at Osage, your lawyer, mean, if you sign an LOI and then send it to your lawyer, what does that do? What can your lawyer do at that point? You renege on it and say, no, I'm not going to sign that now. My lawyer told me this, and that. No, invest in your people, your advisors, to do what's best for you. And you need to have them involved at various stages. You don't need your lawyer involved from day one, right? But you bring him or her in at the appropriate time. And that's that final review, right? We negotiate the LOI. We work out our terms and conditions of LOI. And then we say, look, I think we got a deal here, but we always say it's subject to our lawyer's review. And our lawyer always will have some good comments that, that we want to add or tweak the language or whatever, right? So we're a team approach. So it's kind of memorialized in the LOI, and that's the roadmap to the purchase agreement. If someone comes to you with an LOI and says, look, I'm going to pay you $10 million and $10 million in earnout. Okay. And you sign it, what does that do? We'll deal with it in the purchase agreement. Then you get to the purchase agreement, and there's no definition around how you determine the earnout. And you spend a lot of money, not just money, time, the stress, the anxiety on you and your family, your employees at this point. And here you are trying to negotiate the earnout language when you're at the 1 yard line. I can tell you, it's going to be a very, very stressful and anxiety-provoking conversation to get to what you need to get to, versus addressing it up front. And then, of course, is how you pay the earnout, right? How are they going to pay it? I mean, you have to ask the question: how are you going to pay it? I mean, if you have a big earnout and you're dealing with a large, what I call, let's say, a portfolio company of equity fund, you can be pretty confident based on your conversations with their, current CEOs sold their business and former owners sold their business to them. These large funds, they don't commit to something and not deliver, right? If everything is on up and above the board in all cases, they probably have an acquisition line, and they probably have reserved money in that line to pay the earnout, because you're not going to pay it out of current cash flow. And like, we had a deal that it made me chuckle. We had the deal that came through, and this was just a bid, LOI, and obviously we didn't sign with it, but they came back with a big number, right? It was like a 9 multiple, looked great on paper, and then you read through the details, and it was like, I don't know, less than a third was cash, and then another 40% was the seller note, and another 40% was the earnout. And it's like, and then you read down, you go through, and it's like, well, the earnout will be paid if we can refinance the debt of the company, right? And then we'll pay it out then. And then, by the way, the seller note is going to have to be interest only for 5 years, and we'll pay that out based on our ability to finance the company down the road. And you're dealing with an older owner in this case. The likelihood of that happening is like nil. We just said, thank you, but we're not interested, right? So you really got to focus on the details of the earnout and how it's calculated, how it's going to be paid, and whether you're comfortable. At the end of the day, you got to be comfortable with it. And the only way to get comfortable with it is look at the track record of the buyer, right? And if you're dealing with a buyer on a proprietary basis, just you and that buyer, you're not going to know whether this is market right now. So I encourage you as business owners, as sellers of your businesses, is to engage a banker like Osage, right? Run a process so you see the market will tell you how things are being structured right now, so you can make an informed decision and pick the right buyer, and their ability, if there's structure in the transaction, no seller note and earnout, their ability to pay it over time. There's nothing more important right now. You need to understand the marketplace for your benefit, you and your family and your families, your grandkids down the road. You don't want to be leaving money on the table, and you don't want to be fighting somebody for your earnout payment, 5 years down the road when you're way outside your business, and you're getting a big legal battle when you're 73 years old, right? It's just, that's not the way you want to live your life. So do your due diligence. Have your advisor. We always do the due diligence, right? do the due diligence, and get comfortable. If you're not comfortable, you move on. Again, my name is kdee, President of Osage Advisors. Thank you for being with us today. I hope you enjoyed our podcast, The Ins and Outs of Selling a Business. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. To learn more about Osage Advisors, you can visit our website at osageadvisors.com. Any questions related to today's conversation or other topics, feel free to give me a call at 860-767-3273, extension 1001, or shoot me an email at kdee@osageadvisors.com. Thanks again for being with us today, and have a great day.